let's start by asking you what you feel was your most impact that you've been most proud of that you made throughout your movement. Would it
Oh,
be
that's,
one and or the other? And you can
there are
differentiate.
two, and I have a very hard time differentiating because they're both very powerful. I didn't know they would be, but they both are, and so I can't say one. I have to say two. One would be the book "Sappho Was a Right-On Woman," published in 1971. It was the first book with a positive view of the lesbian lifestyle. Another one by Del Martin and Phyllis Lyons came out about 6 months later, which was very good. But this was the first one. And it was very powerful because people had nothing positive to look at. The movies, the lesbian always got killed, and, and it was always a very sad ending. And this was an analysis that brought lesbians forward from those dark periods where we'd been arrested in bars and felt terrible about ourselves, um, and were treated badly, had no self-respect, to actually taking us through the reasons, what society felt about us, what we felt about ourselves. It was sort of a psychological, social analysis. And in the end, we come out like very proud and role models for all women, and a very exciting end. Of course, we're not there. But so it's still a good book, and now we're 40 years later practically. But it's still an interesting read, an analysis that came out of our consciousness raising, really, with a very smart consciousness raising, talking about ourselves and feeling this euphoria. We were so excited to realize that we were, the first thing I heard when I heard gay pride, I thought, wow, pride. I mean, just to be normal was to be very exciting. So we were euphoric. And this book helped so many people, and I got so many letters uh, and some women who read that book years ago said it changed my life forever, and they just hug me and cry and all kinds of things because it meant so much to them. In fact, I knew one woman that took it to court because she was trying to save her son from being taken away by his father, being taken away because she was a lesbian. She took the book to court every day and read passages to herself to keep her calm. And I mean, those kind of stories make me feel great. So I know that changed lives. My life was changing at the time, and all I did was write down the thoughts that were going. I wanted to explain it to my mother. So that took a book because you just can't. So that's really part of it. And it's, everybody explained it to their mother. They needed this. So that was one. And the other one was the book that we were just celebrating, Feminists Who Changed America. Again, I saw a need, and a lot of people, I guess, realized that there was a need to document our history as individuals, what we did, because even our families don't know. If you asked anybody, even spouses, children, they know their mothers were away from home doing something, but they don't know what. And now we have, for 2,000, it'll be about 2,500 people who were active in the movement, what they did, exactly what they did, when they did it, and a little bit about them. We try to get some stories in there, make it exciting because their lives were exciting. And so it's not just facts. We do have quotes and anecdotes and things, and it's because each woman's a hero, and we want that to come out, and for next generations to be inspired by these women, because they are inspiring. And you read these stories, you go, wow, I mean, these women suffered, they were brave, they were brilliant, and so I wanted to capture that because it would all be forgotten. The only people that might be remembered are maybe Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem and Kate Millett, and some of them because they wrote books. But the presidents of now, the people that ran abortion clinics, the people that had local feminist newspapers, um, the people that got challenged their employers because they were fired for being pregnant, or they challenged them because they weren't getting equal pay, who were fired. They're not in any books, but they're heroes. They paved the way. They maybe weren't the first to succeed, but the fact that they challenged and suffered because of it, that's exciting to me. Someone else achieved after them, maybe. So those two things, and now people around the country are celebrating. We had, like, this was the 12th celebration around the country, and everybody was so turned on and so excited. It was a real love fest of all kinds of people, from women's music and sports. There was a tennis player that challenged her high school team to play tennis with the boys and won. I mean, sports, legislators, you saw state senators and representatives there. It was a great event. It was a lot of fun, and that's what it was meant to be, a celebration. And it was.
Is there one story in that book that touches you more than anyone else?
Oh my gosh, one story in that book. Oh, in that book, oh my gosh, there were so many of them. Well, one that comes to mind, because I knew this woman well, there are so many good stories, but one is, her name was Betty Harrigan, and she was a public relations executive at J. Walter Thompson, the largest ad agency in the world at the time. And she challenged them for equal pay. She wasn't getting, we still don't have equal pay, only 71 cents on the dollar, I think, up from 56 or something. So she challenged them, and they fired her. She tried to sue them. Of course, she was a single mother with a teenage daughter. Had no income then. She was blackballed from the whole industry. Nobody would hire her. She brought suit, and of course they had an overwhelming number of lawyers, and they would just out-talk her and outspend her. And now National Organization for Women helped, I helped, everybody helped, but it wasn't enough to compete with them. So, but she did win an EEOC decision, equal opportunity, whatever it is, I'm not sure what the commission is, EEOC. So she won that, but that's an empty decision in this country. They have no enforcement powers. So you can win, but you win nothing. So poor Betty was trying to figure out what to do. She was then counseling other women in jobs of how to succeed in a corporation, a patriarchal, male-dominated corporation. And she did this. She had seminars. She published a book on it, How to Succeed. What is the name of her book? And she published a book on that. Then she was hired by some women's magazines to write articles, Working Woman and Savvy. And then she started being hired by corporations to talk about how to work with women more effectively. And so she ended up being a public speaker and making some money and dressing very well and succeeding. Her daughter went to college. And when Betty died, she left money for a feminist cause, and her daughter came to the New York event and donated the money to the book, Feminists Who Changed America. So that was very sweet. That was sweet. So that's one story about someone in the book.
So now, what do you see young women taking for granted nowadays?
Wow. I think there's a difference. Women in college probably don't see the things they're going to confront when they get out of college. And so I think they start out, they do have women's studies today, which is great. We had nothing like that. They have some opportunities to see what we did, but they now think they're equal. And that's great, because they're not going to be intimidated. And this psychological thing is terribly important, that they do think they're equal, because they're going to then challenge things when they come up. which we didn't do because we really didn't believe we were equal. That's one of the things that woke us up. Hey, we are, you know. But they're going to find out that they have a lot of challenges when they go out there. They're not going to have equal pay. And when they find out about that, are they going to challenge it and some be punished? We just had this a major case in which Congress changed the law, the Ledbetter law. Now, if you find out you're not getting equal pay, you can challenge that legally. But you know, corporations can do all kinds of things to you that intimidate you, and maybe they're legal, but they certainly have ways of punishing you anyway, not promoting you or isolating you or many other ways. So I think they're going to see they think they're equal, and I think that's great. And let them challenge all the institutions because they still need to be challenged. We do not have equality. We do not have the opportunity. We do not have the respect that we should have. There's a lot of work to be done. And we go out there with that frame of mind that they deserve it. They are going to kick ass and they'll change things. And that absolutely needs to be done. And they'll see this because there are things that we didn't do yet, like childcare. Childcare is something that doesn't have the respect. It denies women of opportunities because they're not getting money to take care of their kids. When they retire, you get no pension for having spent your life taking care of kids. Your husband gets a pension for helping people make money in corporations. But you've done all this nurturing and caring, and it's worth nothing in this society. It's worth nothing. And that's what's so sad about it, that there should be child care available for everybody. You should get either compensated, paid for. This society respects people by giving them money. And so there should be something like that. Now, that's a terribly radical notion, but it really isn't. If it's valued, value means money, and it means being taken care of. And so that is a very big area where we still need major, major changes in thinking and support. So that was not done. And there's a reason why we didn't accomplish much in the earlier days. And it's still on the table. I'm sorry it's still bad as it is. It's like we haven't made a huge amount of progress. I mean, some, absolutely. But we were, remember, women were in the homes mostly in 63 when we started out. 63, late 60s, early 70s. And they were taking care of children. And they weren't exercising their larger role in the House of Representatives and everywhere else, the Senate and in corporations and just in society at large. So we were trying to get them to think outside the house and the home and be a part of the whole culture and society and business and get involved. Because taking care of children is in the home, but taking care of children is also education. It's also healthcare. It's more than your children. So we were trying to get people to think that way. And that's why most of us, some people early on were thinking of childcare, but most of us were not thinking that because we had to emphasize something else to move from just in the home to move out. So to do that would have been to bring people back to the home. Except if you could get people to see this as a national issue that relates to all women, not just your children. So that was the challenge. But we haven't achieved that yet. And when, in fact, you hear young women talk, and they're still talking about like it's an individual problem. I want to go to law school, but I want to have children. Which am I going to do? And it's shocking because you can do both if you can change the culture to give you the support you need to do both, rather than suffer at the consequences of having no help, no support, and doing it alone, which is damn near impossible. So the fact that they're still thinking that it's an individual problem, some of them, is shocking. So when we've had all this movement, there's a movement, there still is a movement. Get all the women together and change things in your town, change things in your state, change things in the nation. If this isn't your problem, this is a national, cultural problem, social problem, economic problem. So that's kind of shocking to hear women say they have a problem as individuals, because where's our history? We can change things. We can make big changes, take over things together. We have power. We have lots of power collectively. So that's something that is kind of upsetting to see them just not see the power that we have collectively. That's one thing. Another thing is the body image thing. Women today, a lot of young women are dressing very provocatively. You see their, midriffs, and they're wearing the high heels, and they're all, they put on a lot of makeup. They even do cosmetic surgery, some of them at a young age. It's like, we weren't into that. And as a movement, in fact, most women who were active at that time were very conservative in their dress and did not emphasize their sexuality. Well, you've got to remember that we were only sex objects, pretty much, with some exceptions. As a rule, we were sex objects, and we weren't recognized in society for our brains, or our possibilities, our vision, our capabilities. They were just ignored, and we all saw it, and it really was painful to see that we were overlooked and not allowed even to have certain jobs, not even open to us. I wanted a job at Time magazine, actually Sports Illustrated, and they told me, I'm sorry, the writers are all men, but you can work in this little room in the research department because that's what the women do. And I said, but we took it. When we found out we shouldn't take it anymore, we were pretty pissed off and angry. But, we found that out in our generation. So anyway, since we were treated as sexual objects only with no brains, we had to emphasize our brains. We had to say, look, don't look at me that way. I don't want you to look at my body. I want you to look at my mind. And so that's why it was so different. Now that women have opportunities, many, many more, everywhere, up to running for president, and they see that, they can do both. That people see they have brains. People will pay attention to them. People will give them opportunities. So now they can be sexual, because it's not going to take away from their opportunities. You can be sexual and you can be smart. In our time, you couldn't be. So, see, that's a difference. You have to look at the time in history that things happen and why it's different. And that's why it's okay to be sexual today, because you can still be both. You couldn't at that time. Okay. So those are a couple of issues that are interesting.
Okay. Great.
And we were sexual. We weren't prudes like some young women think we were. It's just that we didn't advertise it. I always wish I would have been smarter, more beautiful, and wealthier. That would have been a good beginning. But in terms of, so I did what I could do. I'm a rather passionate person. Was angry for years, not knowing why, until the women's movement came. And I'm not a leader, really. I've done some things that needed to be done. I had some vision, but I'm not really a leader. But what I did was terribly important, and I didn't have any feminist credentials, really, before I did this book. Now I'm, whatever I am. Everybody thinks I'm a fantastic feminist, but what I was really a troublemaker on the lesbian issue, and a very good troublemaker, I must say, because in the early years, 1969, 70, we were being hidden. They tried to keep us quiet. They wouldn't even mention the word lesbian. That word was not even mentioned. It was it. It was called it, or the L word or something. And I, and publicly, would go out and raise my hand and say lesbian, lesbian, lesbian everywhere I could. Some people thought I should, like, I don't know what. Anyway, I was very loud, and all the right places. National conventions helped organize caucuses of lesbians. In fact, there were so many of us. We were able to change the vote and elect the president of NOW as the lesbian caucus. All the people running for National Organization for Women had to come to us and say something positive, or they weren't going to get elected. So we found our power in the National Organization for Women and eventually changed things. In 1971, a woman named Arlie Scott and some others on the West Coast at a NOW convention came out with a resolution recognizing lesbianism as a feminist issue. And that was very exciting because they had buried us. And they kind of kept us under wraps still because they were afraid we'd hurt the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment effort, which we still don't have. We have it in many states, but we don't have it across the nation. We still don't have it. And that's, of course, been going on since, I don't know, Alice Paul, 1920 something. And it's amazing. We still don't have equal rights. It's so simple. Just we shall be judged as equal. And I don't know the exact wording, but it's such a simple concept. To think that we don't have it is amazing. But lesbians, the fact that we had lesbians in the movement was perfect for the right and the conservatives to discredit us. And I think that was happening. On the other hand, lesbians were in leadership in the movement and involved in every single issue, whether it be child care, abortion, pay equity. Lesbians were doing everything. But we were kept under wraps. And even though we had enough power to pass resolutions for staff and money for our cause, certain people at the top of the organization made sure very little happened for many years. Very little happened. And now it was mostly in the radical groups outside of NOW that the lesbian issue went forward. And in the gay movement, of course, there was always a link between the two. And lucky for me, I was on the board of the National Gay, now National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. And the men had the money, the women didn't, and the men had enough consciousness, or at least we pushed them to have enough consciousness, to give us equality on the board and give us the money to go to the women's conventions all over the country. So that was good. We went and lobbied for lesbian rights at all the feminist institutions in the country. So I would say today, when I first heard President Clinton say the word lesbian, I thought, wow, President of the United States said lesbian, wow. So things have changed. The gay marriage, in fact, the gays have made a lot more progress recently, I think, than women have. And that's kind of interesting to me. I'm not sure why, but the gay marriage, while we're still losing some things in some states, we're gaining things in other places. And I think it's still on the front burner of issues. And I think that's great. It's changed the way people think, most people anyway, about lesbian. And it doesn't seem to be a death knell to come out as a lesbian as it used to be. I have people that came out who had a lot to lose, often lost a lot in their early 70s, and they were scared to death. And it was rightly so. You had to be very brave and willing to risk, and that's covered in the book, Safa Was a Right on Women. You may lose everything, but what you may lose, it may be material, but you gain so much in self-respect and so much just being who you really are and feeling good about yourself. It's worth everything. So some women did come out and lost a lot, but then they say they gained everything. They gained everything because they gained self-respect and happiness and the right to be themselves. I mean, isn't that what we want, to be who we are? So it's still a problem today for many, many women, but it was a much more serious problem back then, for sure. We have people elected to office all over this country today who are lesbians. So obviously the public does not think it is a problem in general.
Is Hillary lesbian or not?
Oh, no, I don't think she is. She might have had some fun with some women. I have no idea. But and I think that was one of the things her adversaries used, because it's been working for years. She's a lesbian and, no family values. And this. I don't think it's true. And if it is, who cares? Whether she is or not, if you're a strong woman, you're an assertive woman, you're a competent woman, that's a lesbian often, and people think so. And as a matter of fact, when I told my first boss in '71 that I was a lesbian, I'd come out, figured he was going to find out anyway. First thing he said to me was, "Does that mean you're after my job?" See, they have this image, and I said, "No," and I wasn't, but I did have his job in about a year. And then he said, "Does that mean you're after the secretaries here?" I said, "No, I'm not after the secretaries." But when I was talking to my lover on the phone, they could overhear me, and they complained, and I was called in because I was talking to my lover, and I thought, oh, this is ridiculous. But those were tough times back then. They had these images of us that were just outrageous, and we had to deal with them. So,
what year was this?
Oh, that was like, when did I take that job? I think that just 1971. I took that job as an editor of a supermarketing magazine. For my career, I was a business magazine editor all my life. So I had to deal. Oh, there's a funny story there, because I was young, in my 20s, and I was going to conferences around the country, covering them. I went to a huge one in Dallas, a huge dome with thousands, because these are supermarket retailers. There are 80,000 of them. It was a huge conference, 80,000 retailers. I don't know how many people came to the convention. And I came in from the airport, sitting in the front seat with the driver, and I said, "Do you know of any lesbian bars in Dallas?" Well, I don't think he knew of any, but the next day I walked past these thousands of people to the front row where the journalists hang out, and my boss was there, and he said, "Oh, I knew you were here." And I said, "How'd you know I was here?" He said, "Some guy was talking about this woman in the limousine, asking where the lesbian bars were," and he said, "Yeah, that's my editor. That's Barbara Love." So, things like that happened that were very funny, because how would anybody? He knew immediately that had to be me, and he just laughed. So there's some funny stories. Well, there are many, many fun stories, but that make me laugh. But one is you could tell from yesterday's luncheon that the Patricia Ireland asked how many women had participated in civil disobedience, and a lot of hands went up. Then she said, "How many of you have been arrested?" And about 6 or 7 hands went up, and everybody cheered. Well, that reminds me of the late 60s, early 70s, when it was a badge of courage to be arrested. And people wanted to be arrested, because it meant that you had been on the front lines and you were brave, and it was kind of funny. So people, yay, I was arrested, whatever. So I remember we did have a civil disobedience action in New York City, when we blocked the Brooklyn Bridge, when we didn't get civil rights in New York State for gays and lesbians. We were out there in force blocking the bridge, and the police came, and because we were blocking traffic, they were taking people away. And my friend Jean O'Leary, who is now deceased but a very famous lesbian in New York and in California, that she wanted to be arrested, so she ran after the paddy wagon and jumped on so she could be arrested. So anyway, it's a funny story. So that was one story.
All right. How about the most influential person?
Well, that's an interesting question. I had never thought of that before. Actually, in the movement, I have to say that it was Betty Friedan, because Betty Friedan, who was a spokesperson for the movement because of her book, The Feminine Mystique, was always in the press. Wherever there was anything happen, the press went to her for her opinions. And she frequently said terrible things about lesbians, and this was what it was about, according to the press, because Betty Friedan said so, that we were infiltrators, seducers, and blackmailers. She actually used those three words in a 10-year synopsis of the movement in the New York Times. And so I was constantly confronting her and saying, no, that's not true. And the rest of the movement was moving on and had accepted us and was just fine. But she was behind. She didn't recognize this liberation, the liberation movements. And so I had to always confront her publicly, and also the whole organization, and even hold press conferences to correct things she said, and get everybody involved in those press conferences to say, because Kate Millett came out as bisexual, that doesn't mean that she's no longer our leader, which Time magazine said was true. Now she's being discredited because she's come out as bisexual. And we had a whole press conference to correct that and correct what Betty said. So I was always out there, and even at the psychological conferences, and saying, kind of mimicking them, saying, what made you a heterosexual? And, actually, it was fun. It was fun. But because of Betty and my whole reputation at the time was in confronting this very negative image of us everywhere. And Betty was a large part of that. Of course, it wasn't just Betty that had, because then the press had this negative image. And you'd be on a march, a gay pride march, and there'd be normal people. Just my friends and I, business. I was an executive at CBS. I wasn't any weirdo. But I would be in those marches. And I see the cameras, like NBC, ABC, CBS, my own station. I was working for CBS, my own station. They'd have a TV camera. They'd have the lights off and the cameras off. And far down, you could see some fairy was coming up. Some bizarre person with wings and, whatever. They were waiting for that. That's what they wanted to show in the media. They didn't want to show normal people. How boring. They wanted to show men's rear ends, and they wanted to show, all the weirdos. So, sure enough, I knew this was going to happen. I happened to be right behind a truck. It wasn't it wasn't CBS where I was an executive. It was either ABC or NBC. And they turned the lights on when the ferry began coming up. And you know what I did? I grabbed the cameraman's legs and tried to pull him off the truck. I can't believe the things I did. And so that truck with the cameraman turned off onto a side street and got out of the parade. I was just so angry that they do that. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I did some weird things. But so I had a lot of passion. We all did. I can't believe I tried to pull this guy off the truck with his expensive camera. I know that there was one meeting I was at. This sounds astounding today. This had to be around 71, 72. In the New York chapter, some woman brought up a resolution that you couldn't say you were a member of NOW and a lesbian at the same time. This was a resolution people had to vote on. So it failed by one vote. One vote. They were going to pass a resolution saying you couldn't say you were a lesbian and a member of the National Organization for Women. That's crazy. So they wouldn't say that to our faces, but when it was an opportunity to vote, they would express their attitudes.
Give me your coming out. No, how was it before and the coming out story?
How was it before? Well, I guess there are maybe two definitions of coming out. I don't know, having your first lesbian experience and then telling people that you were a lesbian. So I had my first lesbian experience actually in France with an American woman, but we talked about it afterwards on the beach. It was on Montpellier, and she said, "Well, it was fun, but it's not for me." And I said, "It was fun, and it is for me. This is for me. Oh, hallelujah!" So anyway, that was my first experience, and it was a real breakthrough. And but we didn't have gay liberation at that time. We're talking that was about 1960, 61. That was longer. That was before gay liberation. So anyway, my coming out was interesting because I didn't. I came out in a big way, and I didn't do it through bravery. It was just an accident. I was one of the organizers of this conference I mentioned earlier to defend Kate Millett, who had been on the cover of Time magazine, saying she was a leader of the movement because of sexual politics, which was an incredible book and made a huge difference in probably the most important book she's written, and one of the most important books ever about the women's movement. And then later, when she was forced at a conference, somebody said, "Come on, Kate, you're married. Are you a lesbian or are you not a lesbian?" And Kate said she was bisexual, which, well, I don't know whether she was bisexual. She was certainly a lesbian, but it was safer to say you were bisexual. So then Time magazine was in the audience, and they wrote up, "Oh, now that she won't be a leader of the women's movement anymore." So they self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing. So we felt we had to do something about that because we're always trying to correct the record. So we had everybody we could get, the usual players, T. Grace Atkinson, Gloria Steinem, every woman in the movement we could possibly get together that would defend Kate and say she is our leader, and this means nothing. So, and even Wilma Scott Heidi, who was president of the National Organization for Women, it was kind of a surprise, but she sent a supportive telegram. It was quite a big press conference, and of course the big TV stations were there. And since I was one of the organizers, I was really nobody, just a troublemaker, like I said. I had the microphone, and I was rambling on about, I don't know what, street people or who knows what I was saying. But somewhere in there I said, "I am a lesbian." Wow, that was news. I mean, that was this. It was NBC. This NBC network news reporter thought that was the most important thing that happened at the press conference. And I looked at the nightly news to see what was going to be said about Kate Millett, and I saw a close-up of my face saying, "I am a lesbian." I thought, whoa, the NBC network nightly news, I'm out. So I didn't need to tell anybody after that. I figured I'd just assume people know I'm a lesbian, which wasn't, of course, true, but, I couldn't say it in a much bigger way. So then I was asked to be on the David Susskind show, TV show, but that was interesting because it took him, he couldn't find anybody else willing to come on and say they were a lesbian for a long time. It took about 4 months. Then he found some other brave women. As I said, I wasn't brave, it was just an accident. But I said I'd go on then. What the heck? What could I lose? It was an honor to be on David Susskind. So he found some others. One was a Girl Scout leader. Another worked for a bank. The one worked for a bank went on television, and David Susskind with a pseudonym. Can you imagine going on network TV program with a pseudonym? Well, she did. Of course, the woman lost her job at the bank. The woman lost her job with Girl Scouts. The other one was a reverend, a black woman reverend. I don't know where they found her because David Susskind asked us, "Where do you find other women? Where do you meet other women?" And she said, "On street corners." And I said, "What? I have never met a lesbian in my life that met women." I said, "What? Where did you come from?" I mean, you're from Mars. I mean, this was all on TV. It was very funny. So anyway, it was hard to find people who were willing to come out at that time. Then I was asked to be on other shows. Later, I went on Barbara Walters' television show, and I was still nervous because I was using my real name, and I thought people could come find me and throw stones at me or do something. I don't know. It was still a little shaky time, early 70s, to be out as a lesbian. Nothing happened. Nobody sent me any letters, any dirty phone calls. I never had any threats. Somebody on a bus recognized me right after the Barbara Walters show, and said, "I saw you on television this morning." And I'm hanging on to the strap. She's sitting down, and I thought, okay. I said, "What did you think of it?" I'm thinking she'd say something about my comments, my issues. She said, "I thought you should have had your hair cut." So that's so much for our passion for our issues. She thought I should have looked a little better. Of course, I probably should have had my hair cut, but I didn't think of those things.
Good. So then, do you think, was there any major discrimination, personal discrimination for having come out?
Oh, there was, but there was discrimination, but it was, again, it wasn't talked about. This stuff was done behind your back. And I applied for a job at another company. I was with an editor of a supermarketing magazine, as I said, and I was interested in a job at Supermarket News, which was a competitive publication. And I applied there, and they wanted me, and they offered me the job. But of course, when my job and supermarketing found out, they gave me a promotion and a raise. So I didn't go. But I found out later from the editor, who was the boss at that time, at the one I was going to go to, that their personnel department called him up and said, "Do you really want to hire her? You know she's a public lesbian." And to his credit, this guy said, "That doesn't matter to me." And I still would have been offered the job. But you can see that personnel was sort of warning him and saying, maybe you don't want to hire her. But I didn't take the job anyway. But those kinds of things were going on. So yes, there's no doubt that I did. They didn't like it. And one time I was out. I was out on the streets. I took a day off, but I did a wrong thing. I said it was a sick day. I said I was sick. It was August 26th when we have all the celebration of women's events, and I had put together a little street theater thing at Rockefeller Center, and I was playing Dr. Fraud, and a suit and tie, and we had a little skit, and we had another one with Adam and Eve, and all this gay, women and lesbian stuff. So we had a huge crowd at Rockefeller Center, and the TV cameras were there, and they love it. They love things that were very visual, and this was, of course, a little play, and that I had written, and they put it on all 3 TV stations. So, of course, my boss and executives, and I think I was editor of the magazine at the time, they did not like it. The next day, they were in a meeting. They called me in to personnel and said, "You have to do your job or leave the company." I said, "I'm doing my job." The magazine was closed. Everything was in order. I took one day off, and it didn't hurt anything. I'm doing a great job. I got a great review, and the magazine was totally put to bed. So I was told, "Well, we're not going to give you a raise this year because of this." Well, that was punishment, because the next 3 or 4 years I was with this company, my raises were always based on the raise I didn't get. So I lost a lot of money, but it was all right, because you have to do what you have to do. I just probably should have said I'm taking a personal day off instead of saying I was sick. That was my mistake. But so yeah, you're punished for that. So yeah, there were consequences.
Now, give me something. What would you like the young generation to remember you as? they could define you in a few, you know.
Wow. But I like the younger generation. Well, I suppose more as a lesbian feminist, more as a lesbian activist maybe than even a feminist. I had to broaden my image a lot to do this last work for the last 10 years because I wanted everybody included in this book, our enemies of lesbianism, including our friends. I wanted the radicals, the communists, the anarchists, as well as the more conservative feminists, Republicans who maybe some of them were even anti-abortion, but they were pro-equal rights. It was confusing, some of the issues. So I wanted everybody included. So I played down my lesbian stuff because that wasn't it. It was the whole women's movement. I was trying to capture individuals and gain credibility among all of these people. And I'm kind of sorry about that I was not active as a lesbian during all those years, because I was doing this book on feminism, which has gotten great acclaim, and it's had a great, it's been a very important book. But for my lifetime, viscerally, for me and my gut, I'm more connected to what I did for lesbians with Sappho as a Right-On Woman in 1971. Came out. I'm very proud of what I've done as a feminist, and I got this great award for feminist work and contribution to feminist documenting our history, individual history. But viscerally, I'd say lesbian feminist troublemaker. You could put that on my tombstone.